So we are now in the fourth chapter of Kena text, the final chapter. And last week, so the first two chapters of Kena Upanishad, I should say, is where we find the heart, the essence of what the teacher wants to impart in this text. We saw the question from the student, Kene Shitam Patati Preshitam Manaha. What is it that enables, the mind to think, and the senses to function, the body to be active? And then we saw the teacher's answer in the first two chapters. Srotrasya srotram, it is the air of the air, manaso mano yad, the mind of the mind, chakshusha chakshu, and so on. So he answered by identifying that the source of all mental, physical, sense activity is Atma. And in that section also, he mentioned that this Atma is Brahman. You remember those verses that we studied together? That which the mind cannot know, but because of which the mind knows, that is Brahman, not that which is thought of as an object in the world. So after this very detailed and intense teaching in the first two chapters, the teacher told the beautiful story that we were discussing last week, in which, the essence of the teaching given in the first two chapters is concisely represented in the story of Agni, Vayu, Indra, and the Yaksha. So just briefly, as you recall, this story builds on one of the well-known Hindu myths about the mythological battle between Devas, virtuous beings, and Asuras, unrighteous beings. But the Devas claimed this victory for themselves. They became arrogant and self-centered about their victory. So in order to teach them humility, but also to overcome their ignorance, in the story, Brahman takes the form of a yaksha, a beautiful, splendid, shining being who stood right before them. And so they went up and approached the yaksha one at a time. Agni went first. Yaksha asked Agni to identify himself and to tell what is his special power. And he says, my power is to burn. And of course, Yaksha gives Agni a leaf and asks Agni to burn. Agni fails, Vayu goes. And a similar encounter happens. Vayu could not blow even the tiny leaf. And then Indra went. And as Indra approached, the Yaksha disappeared. And in the place of the Yaksha, there was a beautiful woman, adorned with resplendent ornaments. The text identifies her as Uma, Durga. We can think of her as Saraswati. And but Indra does not return, does not go, like Agni and Vayu, Indra does not go back when the Yaksha disappeared. Indra stood there, and then Uma, Durga, came before him, and he asked who was that Yaksha, and she said it was Brahman. And she explained also that it was in Brahman's victory that you rejoiced and you claimed as your own victory. So, as I said, as we were concluding our class last week, that we should understand the story as a restatement of what we have been learning throughout this text. In the Hindu tradition, we speak of adhyatma, those things that are connected with the individual human being, adhyatma, and adideva, those things that are connected with the elements, the cosmos. So even so, we can say microcosmic and macro cosmic. So for everything there in the human body, there is a corresponding reality in the macrocosm. So think of it in this way. We breathe, we have breath in the body, and breath in the body corresponds to the atmosphere, because from the atmosphere we draw our breath. Or there is heat in the body, and there is Agni, heat in the universe, and there is this correspondence. We can smell. Smell is connected with Prithvi, with the earth. So Vayu, in this story, we can connect Vayu as representing the sense of touch or skin, Agni, the sense of sight or seeing. And so none of these are able, with the senses, we are not able to know Brahman, because Brahman is not an object of the senses. This is what we've been learning throughout Kena Upanishad. Brahman is that which knows the senses, because of which I am aware of my senses. Brahman is that which allows and enables every sense organ to function. And Indra corresponds, Indra is the mind. Indra is the lord of the devas, and so the mind is the lord of the senses. But we have also seen that Brahman is not a physical object in space, but the Brahman is not, the infinite Brahman is not an object in the human mind also. We can't visualize Brahman as an object in the mind as we might visualize a flower or a tree or any other object. So Brahman, the Yaksha disappeared when Indra approached, because Brahman can't be objectified. But in the place of the Yaksha appears this beautiful woman. And I said that this, because the scripture or the Shruti is feminine, a woman appears. Knowledge in the Hindu tradition, the words that we have for knowledge, like Vidya and so on, are all feminine nouns. Knowledge is always represented as feminine. So we have Saraswati Devi, we have the goddess of knowledge. Even in other traditions, also knowledge is feminine, like Sophia in the Greek tradition. And she says to Indra, she tells Indra who Brahman is. So she represents the knowledge of the Shruti, the knowledge of the Upanishads, from which we are learning Brahman. Brahman is right before them. This is the beautiful thing about the story. Brahman, the divine, is right in front of them all. But because of ignorance or vidya, and also because of arrogance, they were unable to recognize Brahman. So the teaching of the Guru, the teaching of the Shruti is necessary for this recognition. We don't have to travel anywhere in space to reach Brahman. We don't have to wait for the future to reach Brahman. Brahman is always here and now. What has to be overcome is avidya. This is the point of this story that that the teacher tells in the Upanishad. So beginning from there, which is the fourth mantra in section 4, it's very the teacher in the next two mantras gives different ways in which, or next three mantras gives his students different ways to help them easily, I would say, remember, recall what has been taught before, to ensure that they have an accessible method of recalling this knowledge. Because it's easy to, even after we understand, we sometimes become forgetful, or the mind gets distracted. So in mantra 4, it's a very interesting mantra, and the commentators on this mantra give very interesting meanings. They're not contradictory meanings, but different interpretations. Tasyaisha adesho. This is the teaching, he says. Yadetat vidyuto vyadyutada u iti. here the teacher likens Brahman. He uses the example of lightning. Lightning, Vidyuta. Vidyuta means lightning. So we may think of Brahman, he says, like the lightning. And so there are many interesting ways in which this could be read. One is, from all that we have learned so far, perhaps the best analogy, and again, it's only an analogy, it's a metaphor. The best analogy for understanding the nature of Atman is light. It's light, because it is that because of which we know. Now, if you are able to hear me, and of course you are, then it's because, Atma is present with the air. If you're able to see the screen before you, it's because Atman is present with the eye. If you're able to understand, my words, it is because Atman is present in the mind. So Atman is that which makes everything known. It is like light. And we can think, that when this Upanishad or this discussion was taking place in a tropical evening, let's say in the Himalayan mountains, one of the astonishing natural features would be the bright flash of lightning, which immediately illumined everything before the students and the guru, the teacher. It's a spectacular phenomena. So the difference, of course, is that lightning is quick. It comes and it goes, but when it is there, it illumines, it lights up. And so Brahman is light. It illumines everything. It is that because of which I know my body. I'm aware of my body. I'm aware of my senses. I'm aware of my mind. So that's one important way in which we should remember. Brahman is Jyoti. Bhagavad Gita say, Jyoti Shamapi Tad Jyoti. It is the light of all lights. The light of all lights. Jyoti Shamapi Tad Jyoti. Another way of thinking about the meaning or the comparison of the divine with light, with the lightning, is, if we remember the famous verse from Kena Upanishad. It's very well known verse, and it's a verse that is recited when in our Hindu temples or in our homes we perform the Arti ceremony. And I think there is a connection there. The verse, I'm sure that Dr. Sani and others, very familiar, and Dr. Kumar, very familiar with this verse. Na tatra suryo bhati, na chandra tarakam, nema vidyuta. The lightning, na nemo, nema vidyuto bhanti kuto yamagni, tam eva bhantam anubhati sarvam, tasya bhasa sarvamidam vibhati. So, na tatra suryo bhati. The sun does not illumine you. Na tatra suryo bhati, na chandra tarakam. Not even the moon or the stars can reveal you or light you up. Na vidyuta, even the lightning can't. So, na tatra suryo bhati, na chandra tarakam, nema vidyuta, not even the lightning. Nema vidyuto bhanti, kutoyam agni. How then could this fire? And fire here represents the arti. How then can this fire? And then tameva bhantam. It is because you shine, or because you are light, tameva bhantam anubhati sarvam. There is light everywhere. Tasya bhasa sarvam idam vibhati. All light reflect your light. You are the original light that makes all light possible, but you are not an object of any light. So I think we can read that also in this comparison of the infinite Brahman with the lightning. And the third way I think that we can read this particular verse is that Brahman, so far in this text that we have been studying, the teacher has been helping his students understand the nature of Brahman by speaking about the connection between Brahman and the body and the mind and the senses. Right? So far in the first two chapters, that is what has been the focus, because that was the question of the student. What is that because of which I see, I think, my body is active? But what this particular verse also wants us to understand and to remember, that Brahman is not only that which makes all activities, mental and physical, in the body possible, but that which makes all cosmic activities possible. Uses lightning now as example of a natural phenomena. So all activities of nature, all of the activities in the natural world, all of the elements of nature exist and function because of the divine, because of Brahman. Again, Katha Upanishad puts this very beautifully. Says, because of Brahman, fire burns, the sun shines, the wind blows, and so on. Connects, the activity, all of these activities as possible because of the divine. But one of the beautiful points in this particular verse, near Mimamsadi, he says, after speaking about comparing Brahman with lightning, the teacher adds the word near Mimam Misad iti. It's quite remarkable because he says, and it is that which makes you wink. Because of that, all of the cosmic activities are possible, but it is that because of which you blink. The tiniest, he doesn't want you to think, well, okay, we should associate Brahman only with the grand activities of nature. But the most common, in a sense, the most unconscious, common human activity is the act of blinking that's constantly going on. And we very rarely even think of it, or we're very rarely conscious of it. But he says that it is because of Brahman that you blink. The eyelids move. So again, if you remember, every time you blink, it's an opportunity to remember that the source of the blinking is the infinite divine. Then verse 5 in chapter 4, the teacher returns to a point, because remember, he's summing up now. He returns to a point that we have seen before. So take from verse 4 that Brahman is the source of all cosmic phenomena and of the tiniest activity of the human body, makes all of this possible. And the best metaphor for Brahman, the best analogy for Brahman is the analogy of light. Lightning here represents light. In verse mantra 5 of chapter 4, the teacher says, Atha adhyatmam yadetat gachat iva cha manonena chaitad upasmarati abhikshanam sankalpaha. So we had seen before, again, revising, that the teacher had told his students, Pratibodha viditam matam. Pratibodha viditam matam. That Brahman should be known in every activity of the mind. Pratibodhitam viditam matam. In all activities of the mind, in all modification, changes of the mind, there is awareness. And I had given you the example of the cinema screen on which all of the images are constantly moving. Our attention is fixed on the images, but not on the ground, the screen that makes all of this possible. So Brahman both enables every activity in the mind, and Brahman is also present in every activity. So we don't have to cease mental activities in order to appreciate or understand the presence of the divine. If we understand that all of these activities are made possible because of the divine, then we have understood. So in every thought, we should be aware of the thought, and that because of which I am aware of the thought. But here he mentions two specific mental activities. He just adds to what we have seen before. Upasmarati, remembering, and sankalpa, decision making, the exercise of will, and says that the act of remembering is possible because of Brahman. Because when we remember, what do? We recall images, or we recall words, we recall sounds, and we are conscious of all of these. So the act of memory itself is possible only because of Brahman. So because of him, the mind knows, the mind remembers, and the mind imagines, and the mind decides. Sankalpa, the power of decision making, and upasmarati, the power of memory. All of these, just to be comprehensive here, he's saying all of these are possible only because of Brahman, only because of the presence of Brahman, is the fact that the mind is not separate from Brahman. The mind is swift in its movements, but it cannot do anything apart from the presence of Brahman. So we should remember that. It's reinforcing a point that we saw before. And then the next verse of chapter 4, mantra 6. So previously, again, we had seen, and you will recall this from our discussion, he says, if Brahman is not known, there is great loss. Maha vinashti. It's a great loss if we live this life and we do not seek the knowledge of ourselves, the knowledge of our nature as Atma, Brahman. But if we seek and gain this knowledge, he said, the teacher said earlier, satyamasti. There is truth. There is great truth. We have fulfilled the purpose of human existence. So he already said that before, and now he adds that we should always think of Brahman. So he's given us now, that when we think of Brahman, we should think of Brahman as that which makes all mental activities possible. Brahman is present in the tiniest movements of the human body, the act of winking or blinking, and at the same time, whenever we see cosmic phenomena, we can remember that all of these are possible because of the divine. Everything in the universe, in other words, is an opportunity for recollecting this knowledge, for remembering one's own nature and Brahman's reality. So here he says now, Atha Tadha Tadvanam Nama Tadvanam Ityupasitavyam Saya Etad Evam Vedabhinainam Sarvani Bhutani Samvanchanti. So Tada Tadvanam. So please also remember, he says, Brahman as that which is most desirable, most adorable, most desirable. It is that which every human being, consciously or unconsciously, wants. So Tadvanam, he says, this is the word he gives here. Tadvanam. Brahman is Tadvanam, the desirable, the valuable, the most valuable, the most desirable that one should seek. And so we could, we can connect this with all that we had discussed before. Brahman is that which is free from the limits of time. It exists in all periods of time. It never withers away. It is in the past. It is now, here, now. It will be. It is full and complete. It has no lack or want. And that's what we describe as Ananda, or fullness. It never dies. Na jayate mriyate va kadachita in Bhagavad Gita. So the Upanishadic point here is that, this is what every human being truly wants. This is what we are truly seeking, because here alone we can be free from want. We can be free from lack. We can be free from greed. We can be free from self-inadequacy. Here alone in the divine, which is, one's own nature, there is fullness of life. Bhagavad Gita teaches, that all other gains, while important, it's not dismissing these gains, but all other gains are finite. They will come to an end. The only gain that doesn't come to an end is the gain of understanding oneself as Brahman. You might remember the famous verse from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2. Yahi samsparshaja bhogaha dukkhayonaya evate adyantavanta kaunteya nateshu ramate buddha. All pleasures that are born, samsparshaja bhogaha, all pleasures that are born out of contact between the senses and the mind and an object. Not that there anything is wrong with them, as long as they're pursued in ethical ways. Adyantavanta, they have a beginning and therefore they have an end. They have a beginning and an end. Brahman has no beginning, Brahman has no end, and therefore Brahman is most desirable, most adorable, and it is at the back of every desire is the fundamental desire for the infinite. So we should always, be clear about what do we really want? What are we truly seeking? And in the Hindu tradition, of course, the answer would be we are all seeking the infinite. And only in the gain of that infinite is there freedom from sorrow, is there freedom from dukkha, is there freedom from want or lack, and as I said, freedom from inadequacy. So the teacher here says to his students, please remember Brahman as that which is most desirable, that which is most adorable. In other words, finite gains are important. There's a necessity for the finite, but don't confuse the finite with the infinite. The infinite alone is the true object of human longing, and where there is truth. So tadvanam, Brahman is tadvanam, the most desirable. The next verse 7, section 4 is really interesting, because the student comes back again. One of his students asks an interesting question. So after this long discussion, the Upanishad has a student returning in the 7th verse of chapter 4 and asks a question. What is the question? Upanishadam bho bruhit yukta. Bho, master, teacher, guru. Upanishadam bruhi iti. Please teach me the Upanishads. Please teach me the Upanishad. So my guru, used to say when he was teaching this verse, he says, it's like you go to a music concert and, it's a very distinguished musician, and he sings, in different ragas. And then, so he sings Rag Bhairavi. And at the end of it, he asks the audience, do you wish me to sing any of the ragas? He sang all of the ragas, well-known ragas, and asks, do you have any requests? And, someone stands up from the audience and says, could you sing Raga Bhairavi? That's the one I really want to hear. Raga Bhairavi. So where was he when the singer was singing Raga Bhairavi? We don't know. So he used to tell this as a joke, a student asking a question about something that was covered, which was the core of all that was being discussed before. But there are many reasons. Nothing is included in an Upanishad without some good reason, some good justification. So there are many reasons why the student, in the penultimate verse almost, verse 7, asks this question, Upanishadam bho bruhit yukta. Please teach me the Upanishad. And what does the teacher says? What is it? How does the teacher answer him? Te Upanishadam brahmi vava ta Upanishadam brumeti abruma. So he says, I have taught you. I have taught you. The Upanishad has been taught to you. And he repeats it. I have taught you the Upanishad about Brahman. So he calls it Upanishad Brahmi. That Upanishad about Brahman, te Upanishadam abruma. We have taught. So, as I said, there are many reasons why the student may have asked this question. Perhaps he wants to be sure that nothing has been left out or omitted from the teaching. That is, the teacher did not hold anything back. That's one possibility. Maybe that's at the back of the question, that he has received the teaching, or they have received the teaching in its entirety. But what the teacher says next leads us to think that there is something more. That is not, perhaps just as a confirmation that everything has been taught, because the teacher does say, I have taught you the Upanishad. I have not held anything back. This is the teaching. I've given you the teaching about Brahman. But perhaps, as I said, when we look at the next verse, his question may be prompted by the fact that he has listened, but this knowledge has not made any difference to him. The knowledge has not been fruitful. But listening to the words of the teacher has not freed him, from his sense of want, from his fears, from his anxieties, from his inadequacies. Listening, in Sanskrit we say Sravana, has not made any difference. He has heard but has not understood, or the knowledge has not been fruitful. The knowledge has not been fruitful. So he's wondering, maybe my teacher left something out. This is not working for me. Maybe there's something more to come. Perhaps from what the teacher says next, I infer that this is why the Upanishad inserts this question from the student. First, I think, of course, to say that there's nothing more in this teaching. It is not incomplete. I have given you the teaching in its fullness. Upanishad Brahmi. I've given you the teaching about Brahman. This is what the Upanishad is about. But perhaps the text also wants to make the point that something is missing, not in the text, but in the student. So after assuring him that I have not left anything out, you have received the teaching is complete, because I've said everything that is to be said about the nature of Brahman, Atma. The teacher says in the next verse, Tasyai, very important verse, Tasyai tapo, dhamma, karmeti pratishta vedaha. Sarvangi, sarva angani satyam ayatanam. So tapa, dhamma, karma iti tasyai pratishta vedaha. Sarvangani satyam ayatanam. Pratishta. He says, but you know, the foundation of this knowledge means what is necessary also. If there is something necessary for this knowledge to work for you, it is that there are certain qualities, certain virtues that you need to cultivate. You need to cultivate certain virtues. If you have been exposed to the teaching and you're still asking, what is the teaching? It may not be a lack of necessarily of understanding, but the absence of a certain disposition of in mind. So we have mentioned this, many times in these, teachings. I think a few classes ago when Professor Kumar was talking about Yaksha Prashna, he also spoke about what is described in the Vedanta tradition as sadhana chatushtaya, the fourfold means, the fourfold qualification that includes shama, control of the mind, dhamma, control of the senses, and so on. So here the teacher mentions a few of these. We have to assume that he's speaking here about these qualifications that are necessary, first of all, to understand the teaching, and secondly, to retain the teaching. These virtues are necessary. So he mentions just a few here. He mentions tapaha. So tapaha means discipline, mental discipline, all of the disciplines that are necessary for the control or quietening of the mind. So these may include japa, repeating the names of God with the rosary, different kinds of dhyana, meditation, practices, healthy diet and physical exercise, etc. So he mentions tapa, dhamma, sense control, and karma. Karma here refers to fulfilling all of one's obligations in life. In our Hindu tradition, we speak of the Pancha Mahayajnas, fulfilling obligations to teachers, to ancestors, to other human beings, to the world of nature. Seeking to understand God is no excuse for not fulfilling one's responsibilities in the world. So he speaks of these, as the foundation upon which this knowledge stands. Foundation in the sense that these kinds of mental and emotional attitudes are necessary, or they make the mind a conducive receptacle for knowledge. And this comes again, in the Upanishads again and again, that you cannot separate this Brahma Jnana, this knowledge of God, knowledge of oneself, from ethics. One has to be an ethical person. One has to be follow certain kinds of virtues. Kena Upanishad is also very clear on this, very famous line, Na virato duscharitat. This knowledge is not for one who has not turned away from unrighteousness. Na ashanta, not the one who has not quietened the mind. Na samahita, not one who is not focused or collected. Na ashanta manaso, whose mind is not peaceful. So think of it in this way. Since since we are learning about Brahman, and as we've seen here, bhuteshu bhuteshu vichitra dhiraha. Previously, the teacher says, one understands Brahman, the divine, properly when one understands the divine to be one's own self, the awareness because of which all activities, physical and mental, are possible. But vichitra dhiraha. But also one understands Brahman to be in every being, in all beings. So you can say one understands oneself, which is Brahman, to also be the self of all beings. That knowledge is not possible. That knowledge will not occur. That knowledge will not take place in a mind that hates. It requires a mind that loves. To see oneself in another is an act of love. And I'll never understand what that means if there is a group of people, whoever that group might be, an ethnic group, a religious group, towards which I am hostile, towards which I am full of hate. So to know Brahman, who is present in all, I should be free from hate for all. That's why such virtues are necessary. Brahman is peace. Brahman is Paramashanti, supreme peace. I can't know peace in a mind that lacks peace. So I have to cultivate by self-control, tapaha, damaha. I have to control my mind and senses to achieve a certain peaceful disposition. Then I can discover the presence of Brahman or my own self, whose nature is Paramashanti. So the mind must at least relatively become like that which it seeks to know. And if it doesn't, neither will knowledge take hold or knowledge will be retained. So sadhana chatushtaya, these virtues are necessary. It has become very stylish in our contemporary times to say, that one can be a practitioner of these traditions, but the ethical foundations are not emphasized enough. And here the teacher comes in, maybe he's anticipated that this is his student's problem. So he adds, that these virtues are necessary. Truth, satyam, ayatanam. Truth is the foundation, integrity, truth. Freedom from hypocrisy are the foundations of this knowledge. One can't know Brahman without cultivating, these fundamental virtues. Even, if you're a student of yoga, where does Patanjali begin? His yoga shastras, ahimsa. The yamas, ahimsa, satyam, asteya, aparigraha, brahmacharyam. He begins ethically also. These are the ethical foundations. So, we can't teach yoga without saying that yoga makes no ethical demands on us. It doesn't matter what you do, you can practice. You may, just like you jog or you walk, but if you are a student of yoga in its, it's in its integrity, in its truthful aim, then you have to also aspire to cultivate certain virtues. So virtue is essential, and the teacher is mentioning this in this verse for his students. So the lack of stability in the mind may be the problem he's identifying here for his student, and I say also for all of us. If knowledge is not, if we are forgetful, then we have to ask, why am I forgetful? What quality of mind is is absent. That seems to make this knowledge difficult to be planted firmly in me. And finally, the last verse, he concludes the text. Yo va etam vam vedapahatya papmanam anante swarge loke jeye pratishtati pratishtati. The repetition of pratishtati pratishtati signifies the end of the text. So basically, like many other Upanishads, the Guru here concludes the teaching by speaking of the highest fruit of knowledge, the ultimate fruit of this teaching. And what is that? He says, one who understands this as it has been taught, yo va etam eva veda pahatya. Yo, whoever, doesn't make any qualification, whoever, yaha, yoyam, who understands this, who studies and understands this teaching as we have taught, Veda Pahatya, from the Upanishad, from the Veda. Papmanam apahatya. Papa, is normally translated as sin. Apahatya, gaining freedom from or destroying all sins. Papmanam. I uses the plural here. Papa is not an easy word to translate into English. I don't like to translate it as sin because that term has a lot of different resonances in other traditions. Because in the Hindu tradition, the primary problem is avidya. It is ignorance. So the primary Papa, first of all, points to avidya, and then it points to everything that is also a consequence of this avidya. Karma, greed, greedful actions, hurting others, lack of generosity, and so on. So this knowledge frees from avidya and also has a transformative effect of liberating from all of the effects of avidya, beginning with greed and lack of compassion and love and generosity. So gaining this knowledge, he says, through understanding, yo va etam evam veda pahatya papmanam, and gaining freedom also from avidya and all of the consequences of avidya, swarge loke jye pratishtati pratishtati. So he says, gains, he uses the word swarga, which is interesting. Swarga normally means, in the Hindu tradition, again, you have to see the context. A swarga refers to one of the lokas, the heavenly, we speak of swarga as a heavenly world. But in the Hindu tradition also, as Bhagavad Gita teaches very clearly, Swarge loke vishalam kshine punye martya lokam vishanti. That this swarga is a temporary gain as a result of virtuous action, but kshine punye, when the fruits of those actions are exhausted, then martya lokam vishanti. One is subject to rebirth. So in his commentary on this verse, Shankara says, be very attentive that the teacher speaks of swarge, but he also says, he qualifies swarga with the word jaya, which means the highest or infinite. The two possibilities of meaning, at least two possibilities of meaning here. So he says, jaya swarga loke, not just swarga loka, but jaya swarga loka, the infinite swarga, which means from which there is no return, from which there is no rebirth. So it's the gain of the infinite, not the gain of a particular loka, but the gain of the infinite, the gain of the divine. reality, Brahman, from which there is no rebirth, becomes established. He says, uses the word twice, pratishtati, pratishtati, abides in that infinite reality from which there is no return. In the Upanishad tradition, the Vedanta tradition, the word for that is moksha, or freedom, liberation. And there are two, moksha has two types. We speak of jivan mukta, which means liberation here now in this life while living. When avidya is negated through understanding, when wisdom is gained through teaching from the teacher and from the Shruti, here and now, because avidya is a problem, freedom from avidya is liberation here and now. So we speak of that as jivan mukti, living liberation, liberation with the body. And then the second is videha mukti. So jivan mukti, living liberation, and videha mukti. Deha means body, V means without. Videha mukti, liberation without the body, after death. Then there is no rebirth. There's freedom from rebirth. And this is what he mentions here now as the highest end, the gain of all, the fulfillment of this wisdom, the highest phala, the highest fruit for anyone who seeks, understands this teaching. The gain, in other words, is not a finite gain. It's not a limited gain. It is a gain of that which is without limits. Pratishtati, pratishtati, he emphasizes to end the text. So with these words also, I'm grateful that we could study Kena Upanishad together. When one begins to teach a text like this, one always hopes and prays that one will be able to complete the teaching of this text. And by God's grace, God's blessings, we started and we have completed the study together of Kena Upanishad. 10 years ago, I taught Kena Upanishad. I'm teaching this text now after 10 years. I don't know if I will teach it again in 10 years time. Who knows? So I am happy that I had an opportunity with all of you to. This is one of my favorite Upanishads. So with that, we'll conclude today.